Hello again, fellow board gamers. In this video, I'll be talking about this game called Freelancers. Freelancers is a story-rich board game very similar to their previous release called Forgotten Waters. I'll first review it as a standalone, and then we'll compare it to Forgotten Waters at the end. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Freelancers is a 3 to 7 players cooperative board game where players band together as a group of, freelancers trying to gain money and fame. Before starting the game though, you would have to create your character. You get to choose a species out of the available 9 and choose a class out of the 24 available. And yes, divorcee is a class in this game. I did not make that up. After picking a species and a class, you then take the matching sheets for both your species and class. Together, they will form your character sheet. That's you in the game. You then fill in these prompts right here and proceed to read your character's introduction story at the back of the sheet. Then, you'll need a smart device of some sort to open the app on freelancersgame.com. This app is the heart of this game, so no, you literally cannot play without the app. Once you get the app open, you press start quest and choose one of the available quests. The app will ask you if you need help setting up the game. For now though, let's just say no. It will then ask you to put in all the species and jobs that are in game. And finally, you get to choose the game difficulty. The app will then tell you which map to use, so make sure that you are using the correct one, but let's set it aside for now. Lastly, it will tell you which page to open the location book to. This is the location book. After opening it to the matching page, you should place it within reach of everyone. We are now ready to play. In Freelancers, you basically have two goals, a team goal and a personal goal. The team goal is to simply get to the end of the campaign together without dying. There are two things that can abruptly end the game, which I'll cover as we go. As for personal goals, at the back of your character sheet, you have an experience or XP track. As you gain XP, you will eventually level up. The higher your level is at the end of the game, the better will your ending story be. Don't worry, I'll also point out ways to get XP as we go, but for now, let's go back to the beginning of the game. The game always starts with an opening story that introduces you to your current situation in game. If you're like me and is horrified by wall of texts like this, don't worry, the game is
The world is a wide, weird place.
fully voiced over. After going through the prologue, the game will then tell us to begin the round on the location book. So let's have a look at the location book. The page on the left will always show your current in-game location, while the play area is always going to be on the right page. You start the game with your character's standee, which you will place onto one of these various spots a la worker placement. Everyone takes turns placing their standees as indicated by the order on this influence track. Gaining a number of influence lets you slide past that many people, while losing a number of influence obviously does the opposite. Depending on these spots icons on the left, a place can either only fit one player or any number of players. Some though could also be mandatory and must be taken by exactly one player. What each spot does is described on the right side of the page. But during the placement phase, the game actually doesn't want you to look at them. Instead, you'll have to rely on reading each spot's title and more importantly the symbols down here. But don't think for too long since you collectively only have 45 seconds for each placement round. So, let's say that this is the placement for the current round. As we resolve these spots from top to bottom, we'll first start with this guy. Looking at the resolution side, the spot gives us Might +1. Might, Agility, Smarts, Will, and Sense are the 5 stats that you can gain in Freelancers. As you've just increased your Might by 1, you turn to your character sheet and mark the Might stats leftmost empty box. And yes, this grants you 1 point of XP. After that, the book also asks us to do a Might check. Stat checks are pretty simple. First, you roll a d20, then you roll the stats bonus die. As we've only got 1 might so far, the corresponding bonus die will be a d4. As you increase your stats, the bonus die might change to either a d6, d8, d10 or d12. And finally, you would also add bonuses from your treasures. Though we are skipping the treasures for now since we don't have any yet. Say that this is our might roll. 6 plus 2 is 8. As per the location book, our roll falls within the 1 to 14 range, so we will have to enter 3501 into the app. Now, you can spend a luck token, if you have them, to reroll one of your dice and try to get above 15 instead. Why? Well, the lower range options are basically almost always bad. Alternatively, you could also ask for a friend's help. This also lets you reroll 1 die, but one of your teammates has to take a stress. See, each player starts with 3 heart containers, which can hold the stress tokens. Filling them up completely does not kill you, but you won't be able to do actions that requires you to take stress tokens. For now, let's not reroll at all and just leave the result as is. Oh, and if we had a corruption token before making the roll, we could not have rolled this bonus die as each corruption token prevents a bonus die roll. Anyways, let's enter 3501 into the app. As you can see, more story is being told and we are now given 3 options. Depending on which option you choose, you will get a different story response and outcome. For the sake of this rule stitch, let's assume that we chose the worst one available, in which our character receives a wound. Wounds are taken from the shared track and placed into one of your heart containers just like a stress. If your group collectively takes too many of them though, you will get a game over. But don't worry, you can heal stresses and wounds, which will discard the stress and returning the wound back into the track. However, if you have to take a wound but don't have enough space for it, it will instead go into this time bag. I'll explain what this means in a bit, but for now, know that this is pretty bad since you cannot return wounds from this bag. Looking back at the spot symbol, we could have known that this spot will be might related. Moving on to the second player, she visited the junk shop and the spot has a treasure symbol. And what do you know? This spot revolves around treasures. Whenever you gain a treasure, like when doing this option, you grab a card from the randomized treasure deck. Treasures can be armor, weapon, trinkets, and augments. You can only hold 1 armor, 1 weapon, and 2 trinkets, but you can have as many augments as you can slotted to a weapon like so. This will add a property to the weapon, in this case fire. And as discussed before, these treasures may also add into your stat check. For example, this trinket will add +4 to your might roll. After you've resolved everyone's worker spaces, you then have to enter this round end number into the app. This will progress the main story, and the app will literally tell you to close the book and start travel. That is where this map comes in. We are currently at the start point right here and are required to travel all the way to the final destination, Space 87, as told by the preceding story. So how do you travel? Well, simply by moving to an adjacent area. Though whenever you do this, you will spend 1 time. And that's where this time bag comes in. The bag always comes with the same starting tokens, and whenever your group spends 1 time, you randomly draw 1 token from the bag. If you drew one of these danger tokens, you will then have to place them on this risk track. If you manage to complete one of these rows, the game's threat level will increase. When that happens, the next risk token is removed from the wheel and is put into the bag along with all the threat tokens. The newly revealed number will become your new base threat level. This is pretty bad because the game often asks you to roll against the threat level. The higher the threat level, the harder it is to roll above it. And if you keep doing this, you will eventually get a game over. Some of these tokens are also pretty nasty as they have this plus sign, meaning that you have to immediately draw another token. But there are some good ones that you can introduce into the bag. Whenever the game gives you supplies, you put those supply tokens into the bag. When this token gets pulled, it just gets discarded. Then you have the follower tokens. You always start with 3 of these in the bag. These 3 are the NPCs that always accompany you in the story, and you can even see them on some of the game's tracks. You could also gain more followers along the way, which grants you some bonus effect and adding its corresponding follower token into the bag. When one of these followers is pulled out of the bag, you will then enter its follower number into the app. The outcome and story that you get will depend on whether that follower's card is still with your team. Anyways, after spending 1 time, we finally arrive at this camp. To know what it does, we will then go to the app and press the camp icon. And that's where I'll leave it to you to discover yourselves. There are a lot of different kinds of places that you can visit and they all do different things. A couple last things before we move on to the review. Throughout the game, you will also gain titles and gold. Titles can either be chaotic or lawful, and you write all the titles you gain in this section. The titles may or may not get checked by the app, and you also get 1 XP per 4 titles that you have. Gold, on the other hand, simply gets accumulated on this gold earn track, and anything that you cross out, you will simply get. And yeah, that's basically 99% of the rules to this game. So, how is Freelancers? To start off, Freelancers is really more of a choose your own adventure / narrative experience rather than a traditional board game. It's also really luck based since your die roll decides a lot of the game's outcomes. There are various ways to improve your chances, but at the end of the day, luck still plays a big part in this game. So if you're looking for some kind of strategic / thinky game, this one is definitely not it. Otherwise though, the game is great if you just wanna sit back, chill, not think too much and have a good time. You know, maybe after you played several back-to-back Euro games and feeling like this at the end of it. Since it's kinda hard to talk about Freelancers elements and mechanics without mentioning Forgotten Waters, I'll be comparing both games as we talk about the game elements starting from the story. Freelancers is mostly generic fantasy themed, you know, with the stuff you've seen or heard before such as trolls, dwarves, and elves. But it does have occasional unique and sometimes wacky things in it, like the dung farmer or divorcee job that I mentioned earlier. Forgotten Waters, on the other hand, is specific to pirate fantasy. Unlike Freelancers, both your race and job is locked to human and pirate, but you have your own quirk which sets you apart from the other players. My favorite one by far is the seasick pirate. Speaking of your in-game character, there are 3 endings in each of Forgotten Waters' personal stories, while Freelancers only has 2. You get 1 introduction and 1 ending in both games, but Forgotten Waters has developed developmental stories in between. It's also a lot harder to achieve the best personal ending in Forgotten Waters because you need a lot of XP. This actually often creates a good dilemma where you have to choose to either benefit yourself or the team. In Freelancers though, you only need 4 XP to get the best ending, so you can almost kinda stumble into it. Besides the theme itself, the tone of the main stories are also quite different. Here's how I'll illustrate it. Assume that this long line is the story from beginning to end, and you have these star notes depicting the main story of a scenario. In between the main stories, there are also going to be random side stories. For Forgotten Waters, your main story is going to be mostly quite serious, while the side stories could oftentimes be quite humorous. So you got a bit of a balance between the serious and the funnies here. In Freelancers, it's all goofy most of the time. This overly humorous tone, generic fantasy, and really the lack of story depth compared to Forgotten Waters are making Freelancer's story a lot less engaging. I just never got invested in the story as much as Forgotten Waters. This observation is made after playing this many scenarios on Freelancers and this many scenarios on Forgotten Waters. Also, just to note, the stories on both games are never really mind-blowing. If anything, they're a bit predictable with barely any plot twists at all. But I think their main focus is the humor, which is actually what they do quite well. Moving on, we have the inventory system. Remember that 1 weapon, 1 armor, and 2 trinket limit? Well, it sucks. Getting excess items like another weapon when you already have one means you have to throw one of them out. And I cannot tell you how many times we drew a treasure and went, oh great, another one. And because of that, getting treasures in Freelancers is basically a gamble and really takes out the excitement and the value of the action. In base Forgotten Waters, all you have is a 4 item limit. So if you currently have 3 items, you know you'll be able to take 1 more. That's it. And it worked fine. Should have stayed that way. Okay, so not everything is worse in Freelancers. Take the location book for example. Both games each have their own location book and they basically are functionally identical. The difference here is how many times you use them. In Freelancers, you'll probably only use 3 to 4 pages per scenario because the game only uses the book mostly for the main stories. I know they dedicate a few pages for the side story because I did play around with the app for a bit and actually found them, but I've just never been lucky enough to get them during my plays because they are random. In Forgotten Waters, you'll probably use the book 10 plus times instead because it's used for the main stories and in between. On top of that, you also tend to do multiple rounds on the same page in Forgotten Waters. I actually wouldn't mind if they make us open the book more in Freelancers, but maybe not as much as Forgotten Waters because they can be repetitive. Now onto things that I actually like better in Freelancers, such as the game duration. Each scenario in Freelancers will last around 2 hours, while Forgotten Waters scenarios could last for a whopping 4 hours. This to me is the single best thing about Freelancers because it actually gets the game out on the table more than Forgotten Waters. Now I'm fully aware that this might also be the reason why the story isn't as good, so it's a give and take I guess. And then you have the time/thread system. Both games have their own in-game time limit that discourages you from backtracking in Freelancers and grinding for resources in Forgotten Waters. In Freelancers, this is done through the time bag and the thread board. This system is actually quite interesting because it adds this bag building mechanic which allows you to manipulate the flow of time. In Forgotten Waters, this is done through a rather boring track where you simply add thread tokens to it when the app tells you to. There's really not a lot of substance in it. And lastly, we have the app itself. The biggest improvement in the app by far is the added voiceover speed adjustment, and I always play Freelancers in 1.5. Don't get me wrong though, the voiceover is great and all in both games, but the normal reading speed can be a bit slow. Forgotten Waters unfortunately does not have this option, and when my friend queried them for a potential addition of this feature, they said no. Shame, because it would definitely help with the 4-hour game duration. Aside from that, there is general quality of life improvement overall, like this list of numbers which you can just click and submit to the app. They also sorta tell you if you are on the right page. Also, there is this great in-game tutorial that will hold your hand as you play the first scenario. Forgotten Waters app on the other hand is pretty barren as you can see, so you have to type every number in the book manually into the app. Oh, and I almost forgot, the standy bases that comes with Freelancers are pretty loose as you can see, though you can just fold a small piece of paper like this and stuck it in between to fix it, so not really a big deal. All in all, if the 4-hour game duration does not bother you, get Forgotten Waters. Otherwise, get Freelancers since it's actually a pretty decent game. Hey game designers, if you're watching this, please make a third game with a dark setting. You know, like Darkest Dungeon kind of dark, because I would totally get it. And yeah, that's it for this review. Check out my channel for more board game reviews like this and leave a comment down below. That's it, see ya!